Bo lo dong men nong je, tian bo sang je jiong de, bei jiao wo jiao jiao tu bo no xiang zi, qiu du jiao su xie wu, gong zi gong nian su wu zhi dang zhi, sa qian de nang gong bo de bo, ma nian ji dian de nang jiu ji song, de zai ge bo jiao lo xiao zi. 南道根本就都是上我一切将做世界人不，找不就点所能给我，过不就念就了相随，先就点不知面到月就，先多着我就了相随。六指见着随波送的，两面就念就了相随。 广播突厥节电波，东极节变电波，三南印电江左西，电信西拉相随，大边的强者我就给人给送列住，极多的南求绝波，先觉就那相随，这年这月那样的老婆到那肉。 先给东坡引点点，给点那样上次，列波这样么小心，给我别送错吧，让给三年用说的，点点上节点吧，干么着的么没动，就么是我吃不，面浪路到这道不，都些就能得到。 三能地狱唐七日不言，国防多年拒绝着的，高档那档七月老主意，随便错了着我着我哟。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharipati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure, they neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight, and so on, until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on, up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell on the three times relied upon the perfection of wisdom and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
鸟类新罗居罗所我的，上波东面一年闹着的，九点六月的当这边边，在中国上六年所领报，条件学别居罗所我的。遥远月面书记路中东，大王朝国这边可就去，长见公主婆婆有子孙，长梦到月见了说我的，协助当边穷忙的上，高当天边面部中端见。念旧能行过去送老苏，巴当那么能老苏我的，刚进心的所见中高么，我到这边我修接早的，当这边到不给住的，要是举报见了苏我的。朝中古典老马都结强，刚老刚的新年之中年，交当天幕我中尊在边，春节老马能老所我的，让将送到跟了大爷面。给上大宝这边就我就，这边这边到看这把爷，算在新年能老说我的，叫我更多养到那么多，这边去这边了弄些钱，操到了这一点少做呢。多杰长给公，念头一修三界，就当作界就那么，想求不多，当年就作界。大业之前这边所难见，到了平时上见诸不修上见，又当作界就那么，想求不多，当年就作。大概就这边做那件，到了平时上件就把手上件就做件就能了，想就不多当年就做。大概就这边做那件，到了平时上件就把手哎，哎。他们说，你最近我说高端别那么说下些是那里啊，高端三万那边是那下夜是那里，你看看去，你去看这几千年前那样，你他妈跟我讲吧，你把的你他去嘛弄完去点吧，你他们跟我讲吧的，你他确实有小我看这经济那样，你他妈满意吧的这些多。
So it is tradition of Kadamba. Whenever we receive the teachings of the Dharma or give the teachings of the Dharma, there are three things that one needs to bear in our mind. It's something that is very important. The teachings from the beginning, which requires cultivation of appropriate motivations to receive the teachings or to give the teachings. Or the second is the importance of giving the actual teachings, which is correct and complete teachings. And at the end, the dedication of one's merits. So those are the three things that one need to remember to make sure that you you take the actions of those three, which is very important.
那这些做开的电话是呢，去接呢，你让给谁能用电脑上去电么子，去接吧的，一级可能也做接呢，你另外一个听过吧的电话的话，差一段电没关呢，所以的。
So what is meant by practicing Dharma? So practicing Dharma is all about subduing one's mind as we find in the sutra. So subduing one's mind, which means the transformation of one's minds. So whenever we engage in the practice and considering oneself as practitioners, and which is important for one to understand, to see how much transformation, how much change that you may have met, in your thoughts and emotions.
다 되네 나 내가 네 결혼데 사자 거 내가 간데 제거서네 저희 간데 미바 제거세 난도 생각도 있다 나를 동문 당가서 나를 신의 로마 쇼를 자네 가가게 다 천신 받지 내랑게 되지 난가 되냐나 넘버 2병 벌라니 저 이제 제시지 소모 다지 세나래 엔달라 내랑 주변 아마나지니 권등이지 아니 대한 최소의 돈에 내 파주에 가면 나온데 소리지 대한 맞아 선생님이 더 가지지 나고 그래서 가면 나온데 소리 대한 소소나 두 지신 배번에 시비 미바르지 제고도 송도 같은 제거를.
So now here, when cultivating one's appropriate positive motivations, it is not necessary that I should go through all those details, because now it has been several years since we started discussing on this the topic, the stages of the path to enlightenment, or the Lam Rim Chenmo. So as usual, to cultivate one's motivations, visualizing Buddha before oneself, surrounded by all those lineage masters of Lam Rim, or the lineage masters of the stages to the path to enlightenment, such as lineage masters of extensive deeds, lineage masters of profound views, and consecrated, practice, or the bliss practiced, and imagining all those lineage masters are actually engaging in the discussions of what is the best skillful means for the working for the welfare of other sentient beings. And they're discussing on that, but also they're actually gazing at all sentient beings in a very delightful manner.
되게 원이 신절럽이 전전에 지 대통령이 예시라 선나래 동반이라 지지다 냐바자바 양 저와 이제 준비게 영원되잖아요 소소로만 또 지신명만의 집에게 되는 저와이나 소소야 산다 내려줘 저희라.
So then also, if whichever the visualization it is more suitable and suited for one's mind, here, as earlier that we talked about visualizing all those lineage gurus, profound views, extensive deeds, and place practices are all engaging in the discussions of how to work for the welfare of other sentient beings. This is one way of visualizing all those lineage. But then another way of visualizing here is now all of them are actually in the single-pointed meditations, engaging in the single-pointed meditations on emptiness or compassion and so on. But then making sure that they're all, compassionately looking upon all sentient beings with, delightfully.
아니 다른다 지송이니 지 대화라는 지 나가 슈슈는 대화래야 지 대화 추는게 있네 장게 저집하면서 타입에서지 대화 추비 소사기니 지 단단가서 추란적으로 지 놀로야 아니 장게 저집하면서 저는 냥도 치네 아니 드려지게 지 상관이고 지 선전을 저와게 라니야마 지 선반은 미게 통하면 선반 하고도 지 와 장시시라고지 냥도 예비 손에 지기 전환지잖아 근데 다 생집해서는 비거로
And also visualizing oneself being in their presence, surrounded by all other sentient beings. And all beings has a similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome suffering as we do. So therefore, try to visualize all the sentient beings in your surrounding and cultivate thoughts or thought something that makes us very close feeling towards all other sentient beings. So with this motivations, let's meditate for a couple of months, a couple of minutes. Sorry. With this motivation, the teachings that we're receiving is the lamp for three world of stages to the path to enlightenment of the Lam Rim Chenmo Lam Rim.
당아서 되게 사지 사지 시제인데 아니 제가 비춰와서 내가 저기 전거에 된 덤버투베 엄보네 아니 다 상자야 아니 르주 통매 아니 다 조지 바데야 되잖아요 배관전전 아니 영문으로 종합 집에거든요 이샤지잖아요 나만서 때도 되게 샤지 전잖아 아니 제가 비춰와 됐던 거지 초지에서 알아오라.
So here in order to reflect one's mind upon the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as noble source. So try to reflect one's mind upon the great authors such as Buddha Shakyamuni, Manjushri, Maitreya, Nagarjuna Asanga, Adishep Devamkara Shirijana, and Lama Tsongkhapa and so forth.
다 대다기 제베게 취지 처와도 가려서는 저는 아주 처럼 해답이 되셨잖아요. 다 매지 매조선아래 아니 이치기 매바 세제지 아니 드메선아니 다녀져나 이게 아니 샤줄런지를 받으니라 아니 이치 매바 세게 팀모만이 비치쳐여래서 아니 취지 처와데 도디는 되어라.
So here the greatness, and so those are the authors, the great authors who actually, wrote all those teachings, who actually, composed those teachings. And so therefore, the greatness of the teachings in order to engender the respect for the teachings is the next. So therefore, now, why those teachings are great? It is great because those great teachings are given by those great masters are directed towards dispelling the darkness of our mind.
네 거대고 쉬우죠래. 맞아 나중에 사선주 드메세디 거 맞아 실로 로바셔게 말어. 사선지 신전나 말이 비신와도 중요하게. 아니 말이 비세제데 아니 취지 드메데 바고로. 되래.
So we already talked about earlier that the teachings that we're discussing is Sasungi Dome, which means the lamp for three world. why we are calling the lamp or ethereal. We're not talking about a light, something that actually lights bring about light in the darkness. This is not what we are talking about. Here, the light we're referring to, the teachings of the Dharma. And by receiving the teachings of the Dharma and practicing the Dharma, one's darkness of one's mind is pacified or is dispelled. So therefore, the teachings of the Dharma is said to be the light for dispelling the darkness of one's own mind.
아니 사지 손바데 단다 무슨 라레 단에는 가족이 단다. 아니 강가에 그런 주의 봐. 더랑 주요시.
So then the third outline is actually related to the actual cultivation of our motivations.
다 사지 집어 들랑지서 아카사 치와니도 데비 출은 이시 제다샤와 담방거절 하마 제다 주의린 봐. 또 담방거절 하마 제다 주의린 봐들 대에서 말에 대에서 신이 템비체도 때내로 제다샤 이르 봐싱이 되니 다 예나면나 되 신동을 마서.
So how to listen to the teachings in which the both teachings and its authors are great. It's the next. And then then the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions. And then relying on the teachers, which is the root of our spiritual path, and how to listen and train our mind, having relied on authentic teachers or the qualified teachers. Those are the great outlines.
다 때내로 제다샤 이르 봐라니 당연 주시. 대때나 힘벌렘비시 교와도 힘벌 제단렘비 주니제 다 도모리사. 다 힘벌 제단렘비 주되라니 랑지 나자라니 바치서다 힘벌렘지 뭐지 다 도모리사. 다 힘벌렘지 뭐들라송. 주베 중요다 도모에 나제를 마냥서는지 주베 된다 도모. 주베 챔비 나제를 마냥서는지 다 도모님지사. 다 주베 챔비 나제를 마냥서는지 되라. 네 자이 사지 송제. 대전나 주베 보다 바센제 코나 된바 제다 집이 생제네 쇼발라 로츠예제 다 동번인지사 다 생제네 쇼발라 로츠데라 송제 생제네 로발라 로고비 제세 로바레레발라 로베 산제 문두가 템바 로발라 로베린 바니셰바지 다 동번인지사 다 로발라 로베린 바니셰바데라 아니 니사이레 테바쳔바 젤라 로제다 아니 테 로제 테발라 로츠예제 네다 동보데라 아니 동보라 송 상세제 로발라 노데장와 장네 제세제 담바송 존네 제단림비 추예제 다 존네 제단림비 추데라야 송제 동보님지 존네 제단림비 추데라 송제 데레 아마레 존네 제단림바데라 니레 쇼바젤라로제다 치바도 파세 타마니라 노츠예레 다 동보라야 사제 송레 레 로바젤라로제다 파체바도 파세 타마니라 노츠예지 다시 바젤라로제데라 야니레 이제 추어인 니레 랑지지 산지 랑지 말에 제레 샹세 jelhobal라 혼데 장와 장네 제세 제서 존네 제달로비 취니제 다 존네 제달로비 제데라 네 제세제는 칸라로비 제송아 델라로 칸라로비 제송아 델호바난 디치 델라로비 림바리 다 델라로비 림발라 다지데리 니제 네 쇼바젤라로세다 치바도 파세 타마니라 로츠레 다 동보델라야 니레 랑게 쳬산제주 랑게 산제주 주메바시와 파로데시 발로제다 젠주 주메바시와 디요모바젤라 로츠 다 랑게 산제주 주메바시와 파로시마 로즈데라 주레 짐발라 로즈 추트라 로즈 사 젠르라 마자발라 로즈 젠르라 로즈 산델 로즈 시라라 로즈 다 디에노 짐비 파션 로즈 덴리자 다 님바 아니 추트렌지 파션라 로즈 다 마즈 제세제 담바존네 아니 예동이 쇼발 허그베 아니 디용오버제다 파르시바 주니제나네 아니 파르데시바 주 데예나게 아니 니바 아니 추천난 호스텔에 데르레살라 사지잖아.
So we are on the particular chapter, the chapter 11, under the headings of how to train in the perfection of ethical discipline, which is the second practice of the Bodhisattvas out of 6 perfections, perfection of generosity and so forth. But we have completed discussing on this perfection of generosity, but we are currently on the perfection of ethical discipline.
안되지. 당아서 추천이 로지 되는 양 추천은 나래. 추천 정어. 아니 대감발한 주비 타오 추천 저럽도 여와 대다 주비세 제다 샤와 대다게 된디 봐스. 안데 말라네. 당아서 자이 사지 송바 추천 저럽도 여와 생이 카투 된디라. 추천을 이해는 가세요. 추천 정어 가르세나 제네제다 제발에 도비세데. 아니 제라 너버시에 지질에 도비 아니 손센지라 추천선을 그래 세대 아속에 더 추천시비 거라 만사진사대 되려다.
So how to train the perfection of ethical discipline is followed by the 5 outlines. So we're all familiar with what is ethical discipline, how to begin with the cultivation of ethical discipline, and the divisions of ethical discipline and how to practice, and then the summary. So those are the 5 outlines. And then there are the divisions of the ethical disciplines. The ethical discipline of restraint, ethical discipline of gathering virtue, ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of other beings. So now here, what we need to understand right from the beginning when speaking about practicing ethical discipline is we should know that what is the nature of ethical discipline is to refraining from the negative deeds or the negative actions, and restraining oneself from engaging in negative deeds.
당아서 이제 송바텔니다. 저저러디오라 추천을 예 장하도 가서잖아. 아니 대제 동비 추천 교화치도 선제 대제 추천 송세대 여와 땡키 받지.
So the primary division of the ethical discipline are 3. There are 3 primary divisions, as we mentioned earlier. There's ethical discipline of restraint, the first. Second, ethical discipline of gathering virtue. Second. Third, the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings. It's the third.
이게 맞소게 마 소소하게 장질을 사는 지동원데 림바된 거대고 쉬우지. 배나 동비 추천 세면이 녀시 까비. 매게 쩔어서 대다 바까. 아니 까지. 아니 교화치도 추천 세면이 까비 때문에 라니게 냥설래네. 아니 장질라 게일로도 되지. 선제되죠 저저세디 장질을 제비 냥뇨데 이제는 빼봐. 대송이 방해돼 단다 저런뭐지 추천하시는 인도고 쉬우지 송도.
So when you look at those outlines, a very sequential orders of it's a very related to one's practice, the way we practice ethical discipline here. First, the ethical discipline of restraint, right? So here, first we need to restrain all those negative deeds of body, speech, and mind. The 10 negative deeds which need to be restrained by oneself. Then the next is ethical discipline of gathering virtue. So having, restrain those negative deeds, one is then engaging in virtuous deed. That is what you are actually, second ethical discipline, which is the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, follows the second. And the third is not only that you have practiced yourself, but based on your own experience, you're actually setting examples for other beings. Comes the third, which is the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of other sentient beings.
저당아서 매겨 추천세대 손세면은 매겨와 전제 추천 원로우면도 맞죠 돈도기리 몬쳐와들 매겨 주보된 런싱이 윤윤로 얘나 그 매겨 주보 추천 손세가 말어 이미 통비 토네 아니 손비 편 통비 토네 선반으로 손사되면은 추천이 편한데 조금도 봐도 매겨와 전제 편유미 예바면도.
So here now when we speak about the benefits of observing, for instance, 10 virtuous actions and abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions, right? There should be some level of commitment by understanding the benefits of observing ethical disciplines, and the advantages and disadvantages of in observing and not observing must be understood. On the basis of such understanding, one then making commitment of not engaging in such actions will then become a benefit. One will receive a benefit of observing. Otherwise, just mere not engaging in negative acts was not going to benefit us as we receive the benefits out of making a commitment. So therefore, there's commitment is very, very important.
다 뒤가라 겨치도 추천제인데 맞아 라지 만들어 신지도 토면 다라래도 근데 라지라 네 겨와기 용수 줘봐 춘뒤체 개요로도 표선 줘봐 줘서나 근데 말아 표라는 표선 줘봐 얘는 제가 땅에 있다라別 가서 강에스키 메와 라는 개개 메와 제가 제세 타니 거려 말아.
So now the last ethical discipline, the third ethical discipline we talked about earlier, the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of other living beings. So here now, if one hasn't observed those ethical disciplines, will not be able to subdue one's mind. Without subjugation of one's own mind, there's simply no way that one can help others to subdue their minds.
대송보다 상추 선배기 추천을 요아 저거데 상추 선배지 젠데 집이 고랭다 팀바 그래도
So those are the three kinds of ethical disciplines of Bodhisattva's practice.
예, 가서 매개 주보기 추천데 여러분들 팀모에서는 가신도 소소아 대걸로 상세기 치바 가르도서나 상추 선지 깨는람비 매개 주보기 추천도 소는데 상추 선비 넘비 추천 차로로.
So for other ethical disciplines, such as ethical disciplines of the 10 observance of 10 virtues and abandoning the 10 non-virtues, precepts or the vows, those are ethical disciplines are actually common, or it is shared with, Sherpa and Pratyeka Buddhas. However, when it comes to the ethical disciplines of those three, based on the cultivation of bodhicitta, it is uncommon ethical discipline, practice of ethical disciplines of bodhisattva.
단대지 로샤로지야 겨와추디 중에 가서 로도로 차이 연주지 로샤로지야 단대지 겨와추디 수준네 신도라 수비 겨와라 미네 라지라 마체바 제지 제지 문양바도 고네 공도 배워 셔봐 오 겨와추디 수준 때서 무슨 도 아테레 제시사.
So let's go back to one paragraph, on the page 148. We have already covered that, but which you want to read once again is the ethical discipline of gathering virtue. Here, the ethical discipline of gathering virtue means that you focus on the virtue such as the 6 perfections and then develop the virtue that you have not developed in your mind. And do not spoil the ones that you have already developed, and increase part of this ever further.
되지. 되게 선제되지 추진 차진라 아니 겨와치도 차진의 헌도 로고도 세대 진짜대.
So here it is therefore, in order to engage in the practice of ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of other sentient beings, one must first, prior to engaging in such practice, one must complete engaging in the practice of ethical discipline of gathering virtue.
다 선제되네 소도. 선제 넘버 지지게 되라 미네 대다게 대다 시민 된나 카나마토와 메바 제타 리바조바테 데나 제바 수준류 나시데 다게 때라 베 심베 데르 녀바 양다 양도 다 거소 소도.
So now, the third is the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings. The ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings means that you focus on the welfare of 11 sorts of living beings and then accomplish their aims in this and the future lives in a suitable manner and without wrongdoings. Since I have already detailed those in my basic path of awakening, you should definitely read that over and over again.
아니 대주지 전에 대다게 된세데 저도 되셨던데나 배정연데 인식원 지상 여주상도 네 녀파도 양도 지셨송도아 내가 좀 맞죠 데이터는 논도 샹추zembe 가서 추진하시 리우디.
So the basic path of awakening, so you should, it's Lama Tsongkhapa has emphasized here by saying that you should definitely read over and over again. So wondering probably this, the basic path of awakening, may be translated in English. We're not very sure, but you may be able to find.
강기 넘버 주지 생인데 선체게 넣어봐 변한데도 지 가서 내루를 못 받아 아니 로바쇼 받아 양다번 넣어봐다서 되지게 넘버 선체게 넣어보면 저지 주지 장도 아니 대다라 미비에 아니 되는데 두고래 소한테.
So now here, if you look at the same paragraph here, the ethical discipline for the acting for the welfare of living beings means that you focus on the welfare of 11 sorts of living beings. The 11 sorts of living beings are, such as not having an appreciation to this, law of cause and effect, and upholding wrong views, and not embarking on the perfect path, spiritual path, and so on. So there are 11 kinds of beings who are actually lacking those, appropriate, attributes of engaging in the practice of the Dharma. So if you can look at in the basic path of awakening, so you will find those 11 beings.
대기 단다 리우되게 너 자원데 상사 포토면 집에 상사 놀로 추진류 소에 대기 나시 인사로 대 뒤는 저게 면점도
민도.
아니 어떻게 배제 다른 거 추진류 나시세 추진이 리우데 상사기 가서 파파토면이 상세기 리종선지기 리우 나세제는 아니 저런 거지에 네 대기 제시된 인사래.
So this detailed explanation could be found in the Asanga's, Bodhisattva's Bhumi, the explanation of this, 11 kinds of, 11, sort of kinds of living beings.
대체 당가서 되니야는 예빠도 양도 시세데 와 내대전에 손에 이대로와 네 가서 지다 다 가서 강가 지바래 답이 걸은 예빠도 손 비걸라 이제 자신 내가 손에 지여랬다 가서 강가 때에다 전설한 거 맞아 예 지다 두 개체스게 말해 대예빠도 되니 제고도
The basic path of awakening would be the writings of the works of Lama Tsongkhapa, it's writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, which commentary to the Bodhisattva's Bhumi by Asanga. And so therefore he said, he emphasized by saying that you should definitely read that over and over again.
대나 제다데마 대나 소소탑이 제바 다다니가 좀 가서 이 강이 제바데 대나 소소탑이 제바나네 상추선비 담데 로도숑이 로비 쇼지 임베 상추선비 로자래 레 스나여바 마이라 수트송제 나네 장 담비 수트 소다지 제바 모상 대다 티모알 조도셰바니 샹추센 샹추센발랑 토마 게체베 데니라로바 샤데 손도
Therefore, since the rules of the vows of individual liberations are one aspect of the precepts for renunciants who have taken the Bodhisattva's vow, who are not set forth apart from the precept for bodhisattvas. Also, within the three divisions of the ethical discipline of restraint, the actual rules of the individual liberation vows, or the practice of engaging in what is to be adopted and rejecting what is to be cast aside, that would be associated with these vows is initially very important even for the bodhisattvas. So train in this.
되지. 당가서 고아데 되는 소소도 차보파 고알레면 고아체. 근데 매개 주복이 추진 러슈질에 대해서는 매개 주복이 추진들로 소소 타바세 그래. 아니 러슈메나 아니 동비 추진스나 타니 제도아. 된저기 추진 매개 주복이 추진데 러슈도 상주 선바다 상한지 담바 송가라. 아니 녜파도 고거리 세비 개체되래. 녜파도 하바도 상세래 동보를 녜파도 송고 개체버리 소야 돼.
So here the 10 non-virtuous abandoning the observance of the 10 virtuous actions are said to be the vows, the 10 non-virtuous vows of restraint for the lay practitioners. But that 10 observance of the 10 virtuous actions vows for the renunciates is said to be the vows of individual liberations. So there's a difference. However, the bodhisattvas, and on top of that, then it emphasizes importance of observing the vows, including bodhisattvas vows, as well as the sacred Mantrayana vows, on the basis of vows.
Lobasha de Tinamasirino, Shansi Tela with Diwale, Sutin number sombo deda asa, deda de Dambi Sutine, Duba Sheba than Joa Sheba Yide, de Danshi Sona, Telejemba Tajang, Danshi Son Jola, de Ma Danshi Masona, Telejemba Tajang, Medanshi, Mison and Joye. 대신에 상주선비 담비 수준 냐나 담바 탕체 냐바 예베 줘봐 샤오서.
So then here it says the bodhisattva's level compendium of determination states among the three aspects of the ethical discipline. The ethical discipline of restraint includes the richest to the other two. When you are bound by it and safeguard it, you will be bound by the other two and safeguard them as well. And when you are neither bound by nor protected, you will not be bound by the other two nor safeguard them. Consequently, it is said that if bodhisattva's ethical discipline of restraint degenerates, all their vows degenerates.
예, 세장래도아 마속에 상추 선바지나 소다게 담바데 통추도 아야면도아 소다선나 다가지 몇개 주보게 추진도 네 상설은 제네 고고 말에서 더 통추도나 네 베데 담바 젠다 베데 장로 송데.
So here now it's clearly mentioned, very clearly mentioned that even one is on the bodhisattva's level, when it's actually observing the bodhisattva's vows very strictly, you cannot just take easy on the vows of the 10 virtues or 10 non-virtues, 10 vows, in other words. And so here it says one should really look at this as a very important, because without safeguarding and observing the 10 vows, certainly you will not be able to observe the vows of the bodhisattvas and so on.
맞아, 내가 이제 저기 걸어야 야와도 시작을 pen 소타제 담바세데 링하게 판디 코로마다 시에 말이다. 이지 송버데 링하게 판디기 결혼차이야 있잖아. 이제 매개 주본데 pon거를 세마도 소타 코로 카툴라 아니 제반 제사텔라 이지 송벌 제바스게 제야 말와. 지발에 가 있는 지발에.
So now, Sotarke Dompa, which means individual liberations. And those are the vows which normally refers to the vows of restraining from the negative actions of the body and speech. It doesn't really very much refers to the mind, but it is to do with the body and speech, the vows of the body and speech.
다 무게 주봉이 수리선에 타내제외디 아니 이제 송바들 자고이 진짜가 이제 송바들 링아 되게 시바본도 어디 경로 조ঙ에 인산에 무게 주봉이 수리선에디 이제 송바들 조자는 이제 송바들 가도는 링아데 용시야 거야 말아.
So, however, we always find there are 10 enumerations. In other words, so there are 10 non-virtues and 10 virtuous actions and 10 non-virtuous actions. So adding 3 from the mental actions of the mind, 3 from the mind, on top of that, 4 speech and 3 bodily, actions. So here now, last 3 are the mental actions are said to be the driving force for driving force for the generation of the 2 other actions of the body and speech. If one is able to restrain oneself from those negative thoughts or the negative acts regarding one's mind, then the 7 other negative actions are eliminated as byproduct.
이제 송바들 레저 랑세들로에도 고슈진도와 콜 레용사게 랑가도데 이제 송바들 레저 랑이 레마인 세트니 시기도.
So it is that regarding the mind, the 3 actions of the minds are said to be a path of actions. So it makes sense, it's really becomes a path of actions of the body and speech, right?
내가 가솔래 내가 대치시 내가 가르쳐 만선 내내지와 심하네 야르 도투에기 집이게 뭐지데 간에 찍을서나 매개 주봉이 추천소야 되는 뭐지잖아 아니 야르 도네 아니 더 산제 살은 도투에기 단단 가솔 마소나 가서 고두게 랭거백에서 데려와.
So how do we progress our spiritual development? How do we actually progress our spiritual practice? Is based on the foundation of the 10 virtue sections and abandoning 10 non-virtue sections.
아야 어디지 내가 좀 쉬어지래 아니 가서는 맞네 단다 어디지는 어디도 말은 어디 하다 메이고 강하러 하지 마타나 때들게 유로도 표소서 용토에게 찾은 거로 진도금도 되게 아니 리템 표소서가 주소데 수리소야 들어와 수리소한테 매개 주고 수리소야 들어와.
So without having a perfect rebirth, it is impossible for one to have this abundance fruits of excellences. In other words, abundance the virtuous fruit of excellences. So therefore, in order to have the perfect rebirth, it is important for one to actually observe ethical disciplines. The ethical discipline is the cause, the primary cause, which gives rise to high rebirth, excellent rebirth.
다 맞추게 텔레마 세를 안에 또 대화시에서는 아니 맞추 제와시만 정에도 추억건조를 돼. 아니 라파손제 나네. 아니 라파 추천제 라바데. 아니 제와시만 예송이 동행래 정에 되래. 맞추기 저때 추억건조 적응에서 라파손제 추억건조 코너도 그래. 뒤에노기 단다 추천제 라바데. 아니 맞추 제와시만 예송래 전에 라도 미고 당에 되래.
So just as the Dharma jewel is said to be the actual refuge. It is by means of Dharma jewels, one will be protected from from samsaric existence. Similarly, it is by means of observance of ethical disciplines one will be protected oneself from falling into the lower realms.
그래서 배 내가 지금 생각해 배 내가 지금 소소 가서는 왜냐 소소 하는 거에 가는 소소 이제 배나 초반에 봐지는 소소 초반에 가르 통고 있다니 가야 나야 이제 저번 제거해 둬서 가도 맞수 추억은 저기 단데 저거를 세대에 아니 가서는 다다 제마 저거에 다 데려 맞아 상이 저거에 정해 돼 아니 라바 추천지 라바 또 그래.
So here, as we talked about earlier, that how the Dharma jewel will protect us from samsaric existence. Similarly, this ethical discipline, practice of ethical discipline, will really protect us from falling into the lower realms. So therefore, one should always remember that one should always remember, how important it is for one to engage in the practice of observing ethical discipline.
됐지. 이만 좀 개체를 지대기 kenzu bomba 조선 그 쇼로나 카페는 미세기 최셔디 이쯤이지 몇개 쪽본데 막화 최통해지 이쯤이지 나위에 송거든. 때 가서는 가야라에 소소라 라리 돼야 돼. 쇼로 가노는 이만 지대는도 두가 뭐 쉬우지 가서 갈 거는 저로 제가 뭐지. tel nyanga cheshu de megyo jibo de ngozi chena de inchibi ji rata che to ji kale jogo so do de nga so de khaye la ye so so goye de ro.
So this practice of abstention from 10 non-virtuous actions and observing 10 virtuous actions is something that is very practical for us. As one of our master, Geshe-la from Gita Monastery has mentioned that when he was somewhere else, not being in a monastery, but when he was going somewhere else, particularly that he mentioned that he was actually asked to, the monastery has actually asked him to go to different places in different countries, the foreign countries. And he said that the most important part and practical for us is to really to identify 10 non-virtuous actions and making sure that each and every day that you're actually observing 10 virtuous actions and abandoning not your actions of the body, speech, and mind is not actually attended by 10 non-virtuous actions, which is something that's very, very important, and it's also very practical for us. That's what he mentioned.
Tela kora chimba de ranjo kora ya su de la kora ran so ye chang so so ni re de ji ji le gang ye de shu ji le bu so to che ge me do yo ma ro.
So Rinpoche engage so nan da
pena nga so pena me chang she da long yin se yin do de se yang kora su su se ten kora to ne pa de so mo to gi da zhe za ta che me wa.
So if one is a renunciate or one is a fully ordained person, then observance of the 10 non-virtuous actions are not that difficult, particularly when it comes to the sexual misconduct and so forth. So we are very much safe from that. We're not really in a danger of falling into that path.
But legend ji kelen chinche la jo hama de shema de legend ji jenjang yin chinche la go te na ma zun zhuo sa me. Dan ji de shema bo ji ya na da ka chi chi re ma so legend de no na ji son chi ro.
So if one is a believer, if one has a genuine appreciation to the law of cause and effect, then this is the beginning of our practice, the building of our 10, observing the 10 virtuous actions and abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions are the gateway of development of one's spiritual path. Otherwise, if one is not really one do not have appreciation to law of cause and effect, if one have a belief of everything that is created by someone else other than oneself, then it is a different case. Otherwise, if one is observance of the law of cause and effect, and one should begin from this practice of virtuous act.
Comment tu penses ça de ma de yang ye chösöl ta bu ya.
Okay.
Sanje Chinto Mire Beoi, Loke Nando Chinlo Shubo Shu Yedanguro, Mire Lango Nayan Tayo Min. Ay. 당하면 좋긴다. 자, 대체. 저거 샤워 시순 비셔로 대시를 소소답이 봐. 네토지 인노냐도 존에 대 주도게 제번나 도대 상추선배 로자 진실로 로지 게 세와네 상추선배 출연제 로비 내 맞아 봐 인데 손도 가잖아.
So now here it says, if you think that vows of the individual, if you think that vows of the individual liberation are for Sharvakas, and if you cast aside their prescriptive and proscriptive rules, and say there are other precepts, Bodhisattva's precepts, to train in, then you have not grasped the key point of the Bodhisattva's training in ethical discipline. For it is often said that ethical discipline is wisdom, is basis that source of next two types of ethical discipline.
다들 생각서 단순 레지럽이게 아니 냥선랭에지 마도 아니 오만 냥내 매제와데 가만라 청로에지 자원이는 민도아.
So now here it really indicates that how important for all of us to really, when it comes to the practice, and practice must be done in a sequential order. We just can't skip one practice and go to the advanced practice. This is something that we cannot do. So therefore, following the proper order or the sequential order of practice is something that is very important for us.
맞다 베베지게 나대선에 간제 나대게 나네 쟁게 지하 당하바 손저들 뭐 시위지게 지 소타지 담바데 냐랑게레 대신 받았던 저기 상한양서 랭엘라 아니 밑에 그거 말해서는 러닝이 봐 패치 대리 소녀예요 서로.
So there are also, as some practitioners who are engaging in practice of Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, who consider him or herself as the sacred Mantyana practitioner of the Vajrayana, or the Vajrayana practitioners, by saying that we as the Vajrayana practitioners, this individual liberation vows are something that is not important for us. It is then, as long as we observe the sacred Mantyana vows and the Bodhisattva's vow, that is enough for us. So this is not appropriate, actually. We need to, without having the individual liberation vows, two other vows are not possible.
상하이 진고를 쉬는 담바 용수 줘버치 내봐라 마기 담바 내봐라 이지 미지 샹주 선배 담바 만내봐 상하이 담바 내사 거래요 말 주지래.
So in order to receive the tantric vows is actually bestowed by the preceptors by entering oneself into the mandala, right? So in order to receive sacred Mantyana vows, Bodhisattva vows is a prerequisite. So without receiving the Bodhisattva's vow, it is not possible for one to actually receive the sacred Mantyana vows.
다 샹추 선배 담바 내 친제라 아니 샹추 선배 추춘 손 친제라 아니 단정아 저기 아니 소다대 투모에게 아니 담비 추춘대 네바도 주절 거기도 단다 손대 되래 소다지 담바랑 세고 말에 가르사데 샹추 선배 먹게 주고기 추춘 되라 아니 담비 추춘 손도 담비 추춘대 매발라 아니 샹추 선배 담바 랜드 가사 코로를 연시해 코로도.
Similarly, in order to receive the Bodhisattva's vow, the prerequisites for the Bodhisattva's vow is the ethical discipline of restraint, which actually referring to the the vows of individual liberations, the vow that's shared with, the Sherpakas and so forth. So therefore, if you look at this, without receiving and observing the ethical discipline of restraint, there's simply no basis upon which one can receive the Bodhisattva's vow.
마속에 자치모 그 말에 몇개 주보 되는 신의 문제 지체네 대취제도 소무토기 가사치기 현대 간제 세와 디지체 메시마도 간제로 그래서는 저한테 다른 레고로 남겨야 돼.
So here, very obvious. It is simply that's not possible for one to work for the welfare of other sentient beings without observance of the 10 virtuous actions. If you go through what are the 10 virtuous actions, if you go through one by one, and what are the 10 non-virtuous actions that need to be abandoned by oneself, if you go through one by one, without observance of all those 10 virtuous actions and abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, that's simply not possible for one to work for the welfare of other beings.
근데 초석에 때 람림 첨모 놀러라 상주 선배 담발렘발 담비 추진된 것도 놓고 근데 담비 추진된 소다도 팀원이 녀파도 때 송고 도와 생인데 소속이 남비 중이 전용이 고아지내서나 소속이 라니라 해용해야 돼 라니게 신도에게 당장에 제로 코트 치료해 근데 치고
So here now, in order to reach, one should bear in one's mind that importance of observing the ethical discipline of restraint, dombesuddham, restraint, which is referring to the 10 observance of the 10 virtuous actions and abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions. So without which it is not possible for one to receive other vows such as bodhisattva's vows and so forth. So therefore, one should always remind oneself the importance of observing the ethical disciplines of the restraint.
다들 오마데 지치로아 너버도 상추선비 로자 예실로 로주 예바 세등에 되게 상추선비 추진지 세너리 상추선비 로자기 내데 마시비 따레 마신비 따레 손도아 게시든 그마데 생이잖아.
So here now it's clearly mentioned that it says that there are other precepts, bodhisattva's precepts, to train in, and you have not, grasped the key point of the bodhisattva's training in the ethical discipline. For it is often said the ethical discipline for the restraint is the basis and source of the next two types of ethical discipline.
인데 마신바 인데 담비 추진에 다 담비 추진 간디지 손데 담비 추진에 추진 심만이지 시당 내스 레토마송비 쇼로 손데 데.
So furthermore, it says that principal aspect of the ethical discipline of restraint is the restraining from the deeds are wrong by nature.
대가로 좋고야. 대바 담비 단지에 동벌어이바 담비 추진 생에대 예셔 박강에 되래. 예셔 마가와라 예된 취재서 배는 이게 대중 가서로 되더라. 신까지 떠고고에는 사도의 체마를 수보다 잠만마저와라. 아니 이거는 여기에는 가르다고 있는 로도도 제시고 말해. 된저기 로도도 계속 소바시네. 아니 이게 아니 론셔야 돼. 이거 말어.
So here the ethical discipline of the restraint is one that enables one to abstain oneself from engaging in negative deeds, without which one will not be able to, be on the right path or the right track. Just as without, proper maintenance of the field, one cannot, plant the seeds and grow the sprouts. Similarly, without engaging in the practice of ethical discipline of restraint, which actually enables one to abstain oneself from engaging in negative deeds, there's simply no other ways of building up other vows and practices.
Teach. And don't be children, the children Shimani, you shed the name in city, quarter to sell now, being a pay him.
Lam Rim Che.
Don't be children, the children Shimani, you shed the name in city, and Masogi Shinkan, which is Toguyana, don't put some of Zoe. Some of the sorts of sona, Sagi de la children, Sagi Gona, and the Lotto Caricia sona, and J, and the Lotto the person super Johnson, and the General Lonshaw. And the Gawachi to get children in Yalanche, and Yalan Denny, and Saint Tenji get children in Yala, and Tensia the Umudoa.
So this is how the abstention from the deeds that are wrong by nature, and this must be maintained. This must be, adapted. Without which one will not be able to engage in practice of two other ethical disciplines: ethical discipline of gathering virtue, which is actual practice. On the basis of such practice, then one can then engage, one can observe the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of other beings will come into being. So without the first ethical discipline of restraint, those two others are not possible. Just like a field that are not actually properly maintained and cleaned and and fertile, and the field that becomes suitable for the plant, the seed to be planted, there's simply not possible for this for us to get sprouts and giving rise to crops, the abundance of the crops. The abundance of the crops can be resulted by the proper maintenance of the field, seeds, moistures, and whatever that is needed for the condition to grow the seeds into a fruit.
Near my share, the church then got the Zen Shewa Chicha, and the Zen and Lani to say the Teroa. Nangasoge, and Chushi because Nanga the social zenship, the doctor inside the sang and the Swati Lesona, and social language persona, and the call Chagita Demachauro.
Always try to grasp on the point that the point that I'm making here. You must try to grasp onto it, and then try to follow the practice. One should engage in the practice as I instructed.
Sure, don't be children to Zoyang, Jenja, Mother Ranjin Jakan, Matoa Bomba Yena, Ranjin Jakan, Ranjin Nanjayang, Nimi Chevi, Ne Dubane, Tepagon, Tanje to Sombi, Megeju, Magejubon Yimbe, Tedala, Guno Zayang Meju Gone. Goson yang daba dango de passion duba le son.
Then here it says, moreover, it is taught in all the vehicles, higher and lower, that this abstention from the deeds that are wrong by nature is abstention from the 10 non-virtues, which comprise the crux of the majority of the faults of the deeds that are wrong by nature. You must correctly restrain yourself physically, verbally, and mentally, but not allowing a flicker of mere motivation for this non-virtues. The compendium of the perfection says.
Da Ranshin Kanama said, Da Soden Senate, Sende Sanji, Bejo Donsona, any Nimi Chimbo Yangi, any Shawachireta. Ranshin Kanama said.
So here, the deeds that are wrong by nature, Rajinji Kanamatava, deeds that are wrong by nature, and regardless of who that person may be, whether the person is, bound with the, commitments and vows and precepts and so on and so forth, or not, so long as the person is engaging in the deeds that are wrong by nature, it always accumulates negative karma.
Intriguing, make it what the Tepa Tanchi and Yimi Chambo in the Somba Jujures. Jujuin is an Gunota Tetaki Chegamari sang you Tonjon Sanji Maton and Yantaba Songore, Goson, Yantaba Dangore, so Rosare.
So this, abstention from the deeds that are wrong by nature, referring to the 10 non-virtuous actions. This should be strictly observed. And on the basis of observance of the 10 virtue sections and abandoning the 10 non-virtue sections, one should not let one's actions of the body, speech, and mind, fall into the wrongdoing, to the wrong deeds or the negative deeds. So therefore it says, you must correctly restrain yourself physically, verbally, and mentally by not allowing a flicker of mere motivation for those non-virtues.
당고대 파신 되발래서 토리 탑이 대랑 줘봤대 레랑 줘본데래 녀미샤 데라 네베 로라 피에서비 삼비 체반 줘버요 반저로 링아 이나 양다 당샤와 도디 추진 인시 제외송 송도
So here it says then, the compendium of the perfection says, do not let this 10 paths of action degenerate. 10 paths of action degenerate. They are the path to the joy of the high status or liberation. By maintaining this you reach your goals, which are special contemplations wherein you think of helping other beings. Correctly restrain your speech, body, and mind. The conqueror said, this is brief, is ethical discipline. This is the basis that comprises all ethical discipline, so train in this restraint.
되게 파셔 되바게 도디를 변도되는 가서 내 같은 도디션 되래 맞아 뭐도 하다 메요 거고 타도 녀래 이제 거고 간지 타고나 아니 수준을 냥바지잖아 되게 말해서 수준을 냥바 맞아서.
So here now this 2 verses actually emphasize on importance of observing 10 virtue sections and abandoning 10 non-virtue sections. Because without observance and abandoning these 2 virtues and non-virtue, one will not be able to attain higher rebirths, such as rebirth in human realms and the devil realms, and also will simply not able to, reach, gain the state of liberation and enlightenment.
티 강이 같이 되는 거 뒤에는 출연래이면 티 강이 있다는 시대 따다이래 가서 타봐이 출연되는 것도 타봐도 단지 첨반이가 이줄은 아니 출연래지 매서에 된지지 다 된적이 출연 표선 써봐라 냉해지 라니를 냥내 여서나 아니 생긴 저거 같이 제소나요 저거 치바 제제 용거래 써야 돼 니바.
So then here, if one is able to observe those ethical discipline of the restraint for, very strictly and correctly, then on the basis of one's practice, one will then be able to work for the welfare of other beings.
도디나 링하기 담비 추진데 아니 다 가제 뭐들 하면 거번에 아니 상제기 사이바도 추진 용수 줘봐대 아니 추진을 때는 용거를 했었는데 아니 상제나지 송바래서.
So therefore it says the conqueror said this brief in conqueror said this in brief. In ethical discipline is the basis that comprise all ethical discipline, so train in this restraint. So because this ethical discipline or the ethical discipline of restraint will be the cause for gaining high rebirth, liberation, and state of enlightenment. So therefore, one must always train in this restraint.
제외송제 다 추진 말린 뒤시 인베 대신 대다 넘버 10지 시송신 로벤 나와 잡에 장 추진지 파신지 거스 매겨지 봉원의 시라서 사주발라 소빈 도대 드마야 대다 용에 통만 되라 하다 당생 자나 Sutrin Lama Naja, Dela de Juba, Jero, Teta Juba, Ne Sachire, Jero Son the Tibat.
So then here it says, the Master Chandrakriti also explained the perfection of the perfection of ethical discipline as abstaining from the 10 non-virtues in the chapter to the perfection of ethical discipline of his explanation of the middle way commentary. That such explanation also occurred in many sutras, such as sutra on the 10 levels.
That da Paden Dawa Trapane, da Sachibindo de Sanjay Sora, Sachiba Sanjay Sombi, Sanjay, Paden Dawa Trapi Pada Senare, Takaje, any Chiba Tambana, Jian Chiji Juguane, any Mege Chibogi Sutre Senare, any Dombi Sutre de Sona, any Intention Suba take a degree, Kesi Sutre Tombo de Sona, any Hamani Bemeji Suyuri, so I did.
So now here, all those great masters, including Chandrakriti, had stated that if one is able to observe the ethical discipline of restraint, then it will become a foundation for the development of all other, virtuous qualities, or the spiritual qualities, or the qualities of excellences. It says. So if by means of engaging in the observance of the ethical discipline of the restraints, will then become a cause for ripening of all other spiritual developments. So therefore, it is important for one to first to really to observe the ethical discipline of the restraints. Maybe yeah, let me read this. We already finished reading that. Yeah. Therefore, I'll continuing from this the paragraphs. Therefore, if you initially train your mind in such restraint as presented above, you easily accomplish the remaining 2 types of ethical discipline. So it's clearly mentioned here.
Casa della Druban Juro singing the ditch. Jetta Druban shower city, Jetta Drubits, Jetta showers and say Sutra Pashi, such a line on such a battery, Coro Didichons Madu, Judo. Jetta Druban answer. Tamba to den the patient to den the Druba there. Patient to den the Drubit say, round Sutrin la Nene, Jen Sutrin la Goba. So the
next is the 4th outlines, which is how to practice. So you practice the 3 types of ethical discipline in association with the 6 supremacies and the 6 perfections. When you practice in association with the 6 perfections, the generosity of ethical discipline is establishing other in ethical discipline after you have stabilized yourself in it. The remaining perfections are as presented before.
Passion also name because Tamba to den sing it. And Jimmy Passion, Sutri Passion, Chibare. Tombo den relation of do develop. And Tinola, that Tamba city, and it then Shanchu Samba in Zana, Saint Shanchu Sayo in Zana, then Tamba, Saint the charity.
So,
Tamba to dancing in Chidua.
So
Tamba to that, you know, you Tomba tell Tambasa, Tamba say, and Saint Shanchu say, Yansa Lambi, Shanchu say, Gun and Lambitone, and in Yanacho in Zana.
So here now we talked about the 6 supremacies and the 6 perfections. The first, what is meant by the 6 supremacies? The 6 supremacies, the first it comes the basis. So supremacy of basis. So supremacy of basis here referring to the bodhicitta. The bodhicitta is the foundation. So therefore it is called the supremacy of basis.
딱 되노로 뭐보 담바세디 아니 상추 세계 균을 하네 매개 주봉이 수준성인데 수준되다 아니 뭐보 담바차 그래. 그 상추 세계 센도가 있잖아요.
The second supremacy is 장주쌤이 수렴송배 뭐보다
상추 세계의 매개 주봉이 수준으로서 봐서인데 강 소자기 수준인데 뭐보 담바차 그래. 뭐보 담바.
So it is the second is the supremacy of object here. So supremacy of object here referring to whatever the 10 virtuous action that is to be observed on the basis of cultivation of bodhicitta, and then this will be the second supremacy, which is supremacy of objects.
다 체드샤와 담바생인데 체드샤와 담바세디 아니 수준여서는 상추 선배이 체드샤와도 선선나 선전나데 내고도 타투게 아니 된데 대화주와 인산에 아니 체드샤와 담바.
So then the third one is the supremacy of welfare for other beings. It is what is meant by the supremacy of welfare of other beings. The very purpose of engaging in observance of the 10 ethical disciplines, disciplines based on the cultivation of bodhicitta, is for the welfare of other sentient beings, for the benefit of other sentient beings.
제바데 터케바 담바세디 아니 다 돈유도비 싫어기 셈비 아니 추천인자네 터케바 담바서도.
So the fourth one is the skilled supremacy. Or in other words, skillful supremacies. Why it is called skilled supremacy is because their practice, whatever they practice of such as, observing the 10 virtuous actions or the ethical disciplines of the residents are based on the realization of emptiness. That is why.
senjebane jende shosong na xiangju senbe ne shoba lose kanga zobe sanje de ko to bi che de yan hua tangba se de ne zojang de hua chen hua tangba so do.
So then the fifth one is the Hua Dhamma, which is the supremacy of dedications. Because the bodhisattvas, whatever the actions they may engage, their actions of the body, speech, and minds are solely dedicated towards welfare of other sentient beings. Thus, it is called supremacy of dedication.
타마들은 넘버 답아 담바서도 넘버 답아 담바세디 아니 녀몬도 시시 지바 방비시데 인자네 아니 가서 넘버 답아 담바서도 지니 방비시데.
So the last one is number dava, which is thoroughly pure. You know, so completely purity or completely purified. Why this bodhisattvas actions of body, speech, and minds are called completely purified? It is because whenever they engage in the actions of the body, speech, and minds are directed towards the elimination of obscuration to liberation and obscuration to omniscience. So therefore, supremacy of thoroughly pure.
당가서 파신 조된서 다 담바 조된서 다 파신 조된서데 수준 파신 양별림비 차제노로라 파신 제 강가 상황에서 파신 조된서라고 그러와.
So now the six supremacies, those are the six supremacies, and next it says the six perfections, right? Each perfections, when we engage in the practice of perfections, if we engage in practice of such as perfection of generosity, perfection of ethical discipline, and so on, all those perfections must be conjoined with the practice of entire six perfections.
당가서기 때 파신으로 이게 고아들레서는 고아는데 고아의 자초초여래. 그러나 수준 파신 양들이야 자는 그런 수준상 체스시 먹거지. 아니 뒤거는 선제 대시 저주대 가서 개와치 가서 진바노 이게 가르 진바래 최도 다 상승이 집어서만
최기치만
취지심바 다가랑 저거로 교화치리 쓰지 대대 신비 파신 다가랑 센서소아 아니 진다 추진지 아니 저번에 아니 가족이 손생시 전부 여자는 저비 고쳐대 따다도아 아니 이제는 아니尊重때는 아니 교화를 조위 조화 추진 송화를 조화的现在교화를 조화되요 아니 제 집이 땡인지는 시험 거지 아니 다지 상처 좋으니까 또 상처 산이 보시더니 돈이 또 비셔를 하바도 해야 돼요 싫어지 마시.
So this is how, if you think about how one's practice, the Bodhisattva's practice of ethical discipline can be associated with the other 5 perfections, the practice of the 5 perfections. For instance, the ethical discipline of working for welfare of other beings that we talked about earlier. There are 3 kinds of ethical disciplines. The last ethical discipline is associated with the practice of generosity, welfare of other sentient beings, and which is actually refers to the practice of generosity of giving Dharma teachings. And the second one is now the patience, ethical disciplines, practice of ethical discipline associated with the patience is that your observance of ethical disciplines requires patience. It requires a patience. So therefore, the patience is already associated with that. Without patience, it is not possible for one to observe ethical disciplines, isn't it? So therefore, the patience is gone. And the third one is ethical discipline associated with enthusiasm, or which is the perseverance, in other words, because it requires a perseverance to actually observe ethical disciplines, right? How can we really actually observe ethical disciplines without persevering? So perseverance is already associated with it. Then suddenly the 5th perfections, the perfection of samadhi or the concentration, is already there. And this will then be followed by the bodhisattva's practice of generating the wisdom realizing emptiness.
다 파신들이 이게 고아된 해서나 파신 조대인바데 고아랑랑상 제토를 소소히 용 고아여나.
So here now, if you are familiar with the text of the explanation of 6 perfections, then suddenly you'll be able to have understanding. Whenever you talk about the practice of 6 perfections, one of the 6 perfections, such as perfection of generosity and so forth, you will know that how this single practice is associated with the other 5 practices, the perfection practices.
대체. 네 그런 놀러를 시에데 대한 가서 고아지는 거. 라니 추진은 내 신도 아니 제 추진은 그 비치에 인자는 다 추진 바송도아. 세다 상추 선박이 추진 선박에 가르치들 세데 아니 제 추진은 그 추진 파신 양래는 그 비치에들이. 아니 제 추진 파신 양선에는 추진 받을 시면 요소도 내도 뭐 봐도 상지 비치에들이 세데 생지반의 신대시세 다가란 투.
In the ornament of clear religion, where it says the very purpose of generation of bodhicitta is the welfare of other sentient beings, right? You find in the first chapter of this ornament of clear realization by Buddha Matsura. So where it says now, because if you look at the very purpose of the bodhisattva's observance of the ethical discipline is to teach how to engage in the practice of ethical discipline to other beings. So it suddenly become a generosity of giving the Dharma.
라마는 하지 너 리지. 당아바 대다기 된디와 세리 에니 수준 파생이 사지 담아들이. 나바 대다기 된디와네. 슈비된 상주지 샘명신 제표의 동의 추네 수준의 수비 쇼발은 주비 자와 인진. 선제 당제了녀발 선제 당제 라 녀발에 도비 양초인라소 사통비 수준 진양래나 민비 유도시네 장와다 Le tombo yu tsichin le zambi jodogi ne la samba tape data ne lobatang. Cheba tu mege chola sobi ranjin ta chebi kana mato gan sheba las nima reje jen dansen mand danshin je. Dedagi nane jang damba gan lambi zato nang la dansen yang dang yang de tong la beba shao sondu. Loja.
So the fifth outlines a summary. Yeah. So summary here is now it says, not to awaken and to increase steadily the spirit of enlightenment, the basis of the Bodhisattva's deed is the root of engaging in the deeds of ethical discipline and so forth. It is also the best way to desist from the harming any living beings. Aspire to practice the ethical discipline of those at high levels and then train your mind in it. Sincerely learn right now what to adapt and what to cast aside, starting with the ethical discipline of a beginning bodhisattva. In particular, each day frequently exercise an attitude of restraint with respect to what you know about deeds that are wrong by nature, such as 10 non-virtues, and deeds that are wrong by prohibitions. Among this, also, strive again and again to apply an attitude of restraint towards fundamental transgressions of the vows to which you are committed. So now, when it comes to the practice of the bodhisattvas, here there are two primary, deeds of the bodhisattvas are the deeds of what is called the views and the actual conducts of the bodhisattvas. Those are the two primary, the practice, the deeds and the views. So the views here referring to the wisdom realizing emptiness, the practice of wisdom realizing emptiness. And the deeds here refers to the bodhisattva's deeds that we talked about earlier. And now, in order to further strengthen and develop those two, qualities of views and conducts, the ethical discipline, the observance of the ethical discipline is needed. Upon the observance of ethical discipline, one can further develop these two qualities of views and conducts. So in brief, what you emphasize here is now, we should always follow how those great bodhisattvas who are on the high levels of the bodhisattvas bhumi, we should follow that. How should we follow? What kind of practice they may have undertaken is to observance of the three ethical disciplines, three morality, in other words. On the basis of three moralities, they develop further their views and conducts, particularly of the bodhicattas, and gain the complete state of enlightenment. Thus, we as the practitioners and the followers of their footsteps, we should always follow the practice that has been undertaken by those great beings.
No. Shangchu Samba Songi Nyanle Lemba Nangi, and Le Tombo, Rani La Kada Le Tombo, Rani Chang, 아니 담비 추트는 거잖아요. 니 조도 많아 전에. 아니 삼바 타바네. 냐네 제가 인생에 딱 하나 진짜 전에 냐네 저 손도 다다네 호고 손도.
So therefore, we as initial practitioners must follow the footsteps of the great bodhisattvas who have gone through, who have actually undertaken such practices. It is therefore we should begin our practice from observance of ethical discipline, particularly the ethical discipline of restraint. One must begin from this practice.
네대 전에 손도 쳐봐도 매개 줄라 소비 장신지 카나 마토나 강 셰바세네 녀마 레레신도 아니 단세만도 댄송도.
So it says, in particular, it says, one should always, strive to observe those 10 virtuous actions, and follow those 10 virtuous actions and abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions.
예, 뒤가는 가서 가서 좋아하는 제가 이게 뒤에 나네 장 소소기 담바 강요로지 가를 내셔야나 담바 뒤에 나게네 자이 동안다 아니 다 가지 내셔라 소바데 다 셰바잖아 아니 당생 향도 당거 손도.
So whatever the precept that one may have taken, one should always remember the number of precepts that one have taken, what kind of precept that one need to be, what kind of vows that one need to be observed, having taken the precepts, such as the root vows, secondary vows, the vows of the branches and the branch vows and so forth, or the secondary vows, in other words, yeah.
편의 님이 10톤의 상추 선배다게 강 냥선 내바 나히 아니 라니기 냥선 내 투에게 방수 지지 자와이나 아니 공비원이 아니 레라고 차그레 손도.
One should always strive to engage in those practices, the practice that has been undertaken by the great beings of the past, and one should have a genuine aspiration to engage in practice and follow their footsteps. And as you become familiar with this practice by means of one's genuine aspirations, then at some point, one's practice of restraining oneself from those negative deeds will become natural to oneself without, requiring the further extra efforts.
셰파 주틴진 저버 제와 젠도 세 총을 동해 총을 상추 세비 라바 노 조바시 니지 제 니지 대다 레 다다 대다 예와 도나네 신도지 니도게 준 고반 지신 제와 두마양 상추 세비 라바를 호미네바 조와 다다네 베바 샤오소.
So then finally it says, once you do this, you will be able to complete the bodhisattva's training in other lifetimes as a causally concordant sort of behavioral efforts with little difficulty, with the little sufferings. However, if you neglect these things now, you will be continually tainted by very grave faults and transgressions. And moreover, for many lives, you will be unable to learn the bodhisattva's trainings. So from now on, strive at this practice.
됐지. 내가 내세랑로 맞어 내나래는 공난하고 문제데 뭐대가 요면서는 강라 공손데 대라 가와다 대라 가세메바데 뭐비게 춘이래도.
It is a fact that if one really practice genuinely and continually, then whatever the practice one may have done will become familiar with oneself. There's no such things that cannot be familiarized with oneself if one really engages in the genuine practices.
다 된저기 상추 셈비 쇼바 양다바 로버지 된저기 이동하지라 공손나 에네 가세메바 레라고 차지야나다
So fact that, if such practice will become a natural, uncontrived, suddenly, we should be so delighted to engage in such practice, right? So therefore, if one is unable to engage in such practice and follow our bad behaviors, then it is not possible for one to familiarize with such practice. So it is therefore, it emphasizes very strongly that right from now, when you have such an opportunity, one should take this opportunity and make a good use of it, of the rebirth that one has obtained at this point, to make sure that you are actually making yourself familiar with such practice, the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
Tendriki loja tendriki pesha nono yo ko jebi ko la ne loja de ma lo ne rangi den de la ne kangla loja nangi ge lama de mi pa chi che ne semba no lo chwa ye to ne molang de jawa ye no chi senta nye ndo wo da de ba shu che ndo wo da tendriki den ka sa o chi tendriki chini de yo sa ro.
So here now it is good to read those instructions, the very important instructions on the Bodhisattva's practice, and think of one's, spiritual gurus in front of oneself. With such practice will actually, strengthen one's faith in practicing the Dharma, and will lay the foundation for the development of other spiritual qualities.
Tanga zoge terege ne gyawa de sembe de son de sabi gyawa na shochi da da betala tene ani jese shanchu sembe damba de zone yudong yi shoba de ani nyansele ne ani ran jin senje tanje zobe sanje je ko bon la nywan de to ba da gi shege yin she ne ba yan de na shu be na ma na je shen je lo do so sa ani mo da mo na ani che ne ani de na da.
So with this, let's dedicate our merits. May I dedicate my merits towards all other sentient beings by the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, and all their powers and their energies, and including one's own root virtues, would become a cause for gaining the complete state of enlightenment and following the spiritual Bodhisattva's path or the Bodhisattva's conducts. May I able to accomplish complete state of enlightenment by means of engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. May I be able to establish all other sentient beings to the state of enlightenment by letting them following the spiritual path, the Bodhisattva's conducts. May all the Buddhists and Bodhisattvas please bless me to be able to do this.
Login Jinin Sabi Gewa De Dendang Zhowa Kyunla Gongben Chewa Juzun Losang Zhobo Yi Renbie Nipo Rin Seje Shu Sa Ji Duji Shu Ji Men Do Zhong Re Zhou Lin Ji Nin De Jinbo De Lang Ji Jin Do Min De Bi Wo Yi Rogen do xin lo shu bo shu jie wo gun do yang da na mo da zhe mi chu ji be la long xue ji sa da na ji yin de ro zu ne do ji chang ge go wo nyun do shu yi dang gu ren mi zhe na go na ya da ya mi de ne re do be de so ni Kada yamba gongxin saba de lo mi mo re ge dong zhuo wan Nāng zhēn jiā yuè bō dō jiā jī, dē mā shē bē cē rā gyō dō. Jiā bē yāng jiā cē bē jē zō nē, dē bē rīng bō gyō sāng nāng jiā. Nē nē zhū bē jē nāng nē shē shō, rāng gē jē jē dō bē nāng jiā. Shū zhā cē bē zhā yuè dō gē jē, zhō yuè yé jē mē bā sē shē. Yā yuè dēng bā yu rīng zhēn zhū jī, dēng bā rīng jīn zhū gē mā chō. Chō chāng nyāng bā jī bē shō dē nē, nī jī chēn bē yī rō chō bā. Pē dē 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 sē wā shē bā chō, sē chēn dā yu mē chōng chēn dē. Lē zhū zhāng chū nāng chū rīng bē chōng, tāng dē nāng chū yī rā bē dē. Yā yuè zē bā rīng dō chōng chū jī, nāng sāng chū bē tēn chēn chū shī. Gē jēn sē jē mē dāng mē mē gyōn, sē rō gyōn dō jā yuè mā bā. Nāng dō nāng dōng rī wā mā chū jī, kāng sē dē bā chū lā chū shī. Cī xiān zhū lā zhēng bā dē yuè zhēng, tū dēn nāng zhē dā dō zhū xē jīng, zhā xē jiāng cī shū gyōn chō zhū jī, zhū zhū nā mīng gu sē rō dēn, nāng gā chēn dē shū zhū jē bā nāng, lō zhāng dē bē zhū mē sā sōng jī, zhū yé mīng sē dā dō nē zhū jī, kāng rō rō yé gu yu xīng hā sū, pē dāng dē wā mā rē zhō yé nē, xiān rē zē wā rē zē jā zō yé, jā bē sēn tē bā dō tēn zhō jī, jā bē bā yuè jē dā chēn bā, gyōn dō zāng bō tēn yāng dē jiān dē, dē dā gyōn jē jē sē dā rō jī, gē wā dē dā dāng jē rō dō ngō, dē zōng xē bē jā wā dāng jē jē, wā wā gāng lā chō dō ngā bā dē, lō jiān gyō yuè zā wā dē kēn jāng, zōng bā yē jē rā dō ngō. Hā yā, tū chē nā.